If you're anything like me, you've probably always wanted to get your hands on a Russian AKS-74U, or Krinkov, or a Suka if you really want to get into it. But they've really been pretty much unobtainable on the US market, short of some Arsenal shorties that came in for a little while, or the incredibly expensive AKS-74U parts kits that came in that you would also have to get built. Now that changed in early 2024 when Palmetto State Armory came out with the Krinkov. Now, while the PSA Krink really made these more obtainable for your average gun owner in the US, they have come with their fair share of downsides. And like I said, they have some changes. They added a side rail to it, and then it's a little bit different in the receiver design. But for the most part, it's going to be the same as an AKS-74U. Now, the one big downside is, again, it's a PSA, so a US-made AK, which have been known to be anything from pretty good, pretty reliable in holding up over time to basically hand grenades. And in my experience, this gun's been pretty good so far. However, there are some issues that I've noted with it that we'll get into later on. But first, let's just talk about the history of the AKS-74U and why the Soviets adopted it. In 1973, the Soviets started a design competition for a fully automatic carbine, and the idea was actually quite similar to the US M1 carbine trials, where they were looking for a PDW type of rifle that would be able to equip like your paratroopers, vehicle crewmen, pilots, stuff like that, soldiers who need a small and very easily carryable weapon. For these trials, a who's who of Soviet arms designers came out with their own prototypes for it. So you had, of course, Kalashnikov, whose prototype was eventually adopted. You had Simonov, you had Stechkin, you had Dragunov. Pretty much all of your really famous Soviet designers had something for these trials. In 1977, however, they finalized on Kalashnikov's design, the AKS-74U. Now, the reason they went with that model versus all of the competition is more along the lines of ease of production. So, of course, this is essentially just a shortened version of the Soviet AKS-74, so the folding stock version of the AK-74. So all the parts are going to be fairly similar to mass produce and to build, and it also had quite a bit of parts commonality with the full-size AK-74. And of course, it retained the AK-74's operating system, just with a shorter gas piston to accommodate the 8.1-inch barrel that it came with, chambered in 545 by 39, the current Soviet cartridge. And it also had the folding stock, the triangular folding stock from the AKS-74U, took AK-74 magazines and grips. The handguards, of course, are going to be different and shorter on this model. And then it also has this really interesting conical flash hider with a little blast chamber that's trying its hardest but kind of failing. The muzzle booster also increased the back pressure into the gas system, so you got a little bit more reliability out of that. And they also had to speed up the twist rate on the barrel from the 1 in 7.8-inch twist barrel from the original AK-74 to a 1 in 6.3-inch twist, which was really necessary to stabilize that 5.45 round in the 8-inch barrel. The sights were also changed, going from the tangent on the rear trunnion from the original AK series to one that's mounted on the dust cover, and the dust cover is now hinged and permanently attached to the trunnion itself. The AKS-74U also came with a couple of different nicknames over the years. So, of course, you have the official designation of it, but then you also have Suka, which is what some Soviet soldiers called it, which means bitch, because this thing is kind of a bitch to shoot sometimes. It has a giant flame coming out the end. And I'm pretty sure the first time I had it out at a public range, the old dude in the lane next to me was having a heart attack every time I pulled the trigger. The most well-known name for these, though, in the US is going to be Krinkov, and of course that's what PSA went with for their name. And the origins of Krinkov are actually pretty murky, but they likely go back to Afghanistan in the 1980s after Afghanistan was invaded by the Russians. And they captured quite a few of these, and the story is that one of these was captured with a Soviet officer named Krinkov, and that's where the Mujahideen got the name. Now, is that the actual explanation for where it came from? No idea. No one really knows for sure, but that stuck with this rifle throughout the years, particularly in the US. The Krink has also popped up with some less than savory characters, the most famous of which being Osama bin Laden, in a picture where he had an AKS-74U next to him with a 45-round RPK-74 magazine, which is kind of hilarious. but that's one of the best known appearances of this rifle, and they still pop up with terrorist groups even up till today, in which they're kind of a flex item because these are fairly rare compared to other AK variants. All of the Russian cranks that you're going to see on the US market are going to be parts kits build. So you have receivers and barrels, bolts, all that stuff that came from somewhere in the world had to be demilled, cut apart, and sent into the US where they were reconstructed on a new made US receiver. And those parts kits have been very difficult to come by over the years and also incredibly expensive, coming up over $3,000 for just a kit. Plus, after that, you're going to have to get it built by somebody who knows what they're doing. For a while, Arsenal of Bulgaria also imported their version of the AKS-74U, the SLR 104, 105, and 107, which were in 545, 556, and 762 by 39. And they imported those for a couple of years, but they were incredibly expensive and the imports have dried up on them. Additionally, most of those came in with an extended 16-inch barrel to comply with US NFA laws, so you would have to get somebody to cut down the barrel and properly recrown it, do all that fun stuff so it actually works correctly to get that original Krink look. And that's where we get into US-made AKs, which is a subject I really don't want to get deeply into because there are a lot of opinions on it, and some of them are quite heated, and for good reason, particularly since some of the early AKs made in the US were borderline hand grenades because they use cast trunnions among other things. The rivets are also not always going to be as good as the original Comblock ones. So that's a very complicated and heated subject between different AK experts. PSA AKs have not escaped that controversy, and throughout the years they have had different QC issues, as well as the build has not always been the best on them. However, they have come a long way since they started making AKs. And in early 2024, that's when PSA added the Krinkov to their lines. And the Krink comes in 3 different calibers, so mine is the original 5.56 caliber that they released. There are some issues with that, and those primarily have to do with magazine availability, which has gotten a lot better, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. The second variant that came out is 300 Blackout, which of course uses 5.56 magazines. And that one's interesting because they actually modified the gas system. So there's a gas tube that leads back a little bit further and is designed to work with the 300 Blackout cartridge with both supersonics and subsonics. So quite a bit of modification had to go into that one. And more recently, they released an original 545 by 39 variant. And that gets us up to date on the history of the AKS-74U. So let's go ahead and get started with the ratings. And real quick, I want to give a big shout out to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia, where I attempted to do the accuracy testing for the Krink. They're absolutely fantastic, so if you're in the DC area, please check them out. I would also like to shill for my Patreon real quick, which I just started up, and it's mainly to cover ammo costs for the channel and hopefully getting some new stuff to review. So if you feel like contributing, please do so, but it's not necessary if you don't want to. Starting off with the accuracy, the Krink is 100% going to get a 1. And that's because this thing really did not group at all for me. And the 1 is frankly being a little bit nice to it because I was seeing at best a 6.7 MOA group. And honestly, I think this thing is closer to 10 MOA generally. Now, I think that's more of an issue of my rifle in particular. I think it's probably had something wrong with the way it's constructed somewhere. Something's wrong with the barrel. And honestly, probably should go back to PSA at some point for them to take a look at it. But I've been seeing reports of other people also having accuracy issues, but I've also seen reports of people getting around 4 MOA accuracy with their Krinks, which is a little bit more realistic in what I'd expect to see out of this rifle. Now for it, I did test both M193 55 grain and M855 62 grain ammunition just to see if maybe that was causing the issue, and I got the same results with both of them. I also had a buddy step in and try out his luck with it, and he got the same results. So accuracy on mine is completely cooked, and this rifle definitely has something wrong with it. Next up, we have Aftermarket, where it's going to be doing much better sitting at a 4. And there's actually quite a bit of customization that you can do for a Krink. Starting off with the stock, there's quite a few options. This utilizes a 4.5mm hinged receiver, So you can get any stock that's going to work with that 4.5 millimeter. So of course I have the triangle stock on here. There's plenty of different adapters for it. From PSA, I believe it comes with a Picatinny rail back end on some of the models that come with braces. So you can throw whatever you want on there. You can also throw Midwest Industries Picatinny rail adapter on there. I think Fab Defense, JMac Customs, there's plenty of different companies that make stocks for the 4.5 millimeter back end. Now, as far as pistol grips go, it is compatible with all AK style of pistol grips. So, of course, you have the wood one I have on here. You have got Magpul. You have Reptilia, just came out with one. So, again, there's going to be quite a few different options to include surplus grips. For handguards, those are going to be Krink specific. So, of course, you have different wooden handguards. For all the wood furniture on this guy, there's going to be a couple of companies that make new production wood that are kind of reproductions of the original. APS and Comblock Customs both make different wood furniture kits for these, which are going to be an improvement over the original PSA ones. The PSA handguard and grip are fine. However, the wood does feel a little bit soft and the lacquer is wearing off in a couple of places. It is nice that it is laminate wood like the original handguards. So if you really want to, and I'm kind of considering sanding these down and refinishing them or restaining them with a different lacquer, so that is an option. Now, if you want to go the modern route, that opens up a lot of doors. You have Midwest Industries, JMac Customs, RS Regulate makes handguards for these, I believe, too. And so there's quite a few different options if you want to modernize it. For muzzle devices, this does use the AK-74 standard 24 by 1.5 millimeter threads, so you can throw whatever fits on an AK-74 on this guy. For me, I did throw a JMac Customs chemo adapter on there, and that allowed me to use a suppressor on this guy, so that is an option. And pretty much any other one or any brake that's going to fit on an AK-74 fits on this. As far as optics mounting goes, provided your rifle can actually hit stuff, you have a couple of options. My recommended one is use that side rail because that's the best and most reliable way to get a good zero on an AK. For my recommended one, I would say RS Regulate makes some of the best AK side rails out there. So that's what I'm using here currently with this Hollow Sun optic. And then also Midwest Industries makes very, very good solid mounts as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the Krink is the rear sight is cantilevered essentially over the top cover a lot further back than it is on a typical AK. So you're going to run into issues with a lot of mounts where it's typically mounted a little bit further forward with the optic. You have to have a rear biased optic for this to work on the Krinkov. If you absolutely do not want to use a side rail, Texas Weapon Systems does produce a top cover which replaces this one. It's a little bit involved because you're going to have to pop out the rivet here at the front to swap it out. However, they do make one with a pick rail on the top cover that should retain zero pretty well compared to most other AK rail top covers. The hinge section up front definitely helps with that. The safety selector is going to be AK standard, so you can swap that out for whichever one you want. Of course, there's quite a few different options there. The one that comes stock on this, I actually think is basically perfect because it has a little ledge on it, which is great for right-handed shooters. And it doesn't have the cutout for the charging handle, which I personally don't like because it's also a dust cover and you just put a hole in your dust cover, which isn't great. Now, as far as the trigger goes, you again have a ton of different options because it's AK standard. It is a single hook cut receiver though, so if you want to use a 2-hook style of trigger, you're going to have to cut out a little portion, which isn't difficult to do, but you are going to have to slightly modify the gun to use a twin hook one. But you have great options from ALG, Tapco, and eventually there is likely going to be a FRT for the AK, and there's already super safeties available. Now, something in the past that's been a huge issue with 5.56 AKs has been magazine availability, because there really weren't a ton of different options for it. That has gotten a ton better in recent times. So this is an original 5.45 Bakelite magazine, and these can be modified with one of these pod arms followers to work extremely well with 5.56. I haven't had any issues at all using this magazine. So that is an option if you really want to get that original Krink look. The Palmo State Armory 5.56 magazines, this is what ships with the Krink, is actually incredibly high quality. I really like this magazine. It's got steel reinforcements in all the right places on the tab here in the back, as well as up in the locking lug up front, and it also has metal reinforcements on the feed lips and the front spine. So these are really good magazines, and I've had really good luck with it. Another new option for 5.56 AK mags is going to be the Bulgarian imports from Gun Mag Warehouse. And again, these are going to have metal reinforcements. It is interesting for the locking tab in the rear. It's basically just sheet steel over a polymer tab, but it does seem to work really well. You can see there is metal in the feed lips, as well as up front here, you do have metal in that front little tab there. Another awesome option are going to be the FB Radom magazines. So these are the Polish military magazines for the Beryl AKs, and they're actually really good overall. I have had good luck with mine. It is entirely polymer, so it's likely not going to be as durable as some of the other options here, but it is a good magazine, and they come for a pretty good price as well. So this is a good option, and you can see through it to see how much ammunition you have left. And finally, if you want to be really Gucci, if it wasn't Gucci enough for the Bakelite magazine, you also have the Circle 10 or the Arsenal magazines, and these things are tanks. So these are the classic waffle mags. Everything on them is well done. You have steel reinforcements everywhere with these, but they are incredibly expensive and sometimes difficult to get, but absolutely fantastic magazines. Next up, we have durability, where I'm going to give the Krinkov a 2, and there's quite a bit to go over here. So just starting with the external finish, it's actually quite nice on this. I think it's a paint style of finish, but it looks really good, and it seems to hold up really well. Now, as far as the wood goes, again, it's going to be that laminate style of wood. It does feel a little bit soft to me, and the finish, the lacquer, is kind of wearing off in places, so that is something that maybe would be good to sand down and refinish again, but overall, it's not terrible. All right, now starting to get into the bad, one thing is the front sight on mine is canted, so that is a very common issue on AKs. It's not necessarily a showstopper, and if you can get the AK zeroed, it's not a problem. It's more of an annoyance than anything else. I was able to get a semblance of a zero. That, of course, I can't get groups with this thing, so that doesn't matter as much as you think it would. But I did have to drift that front sight to the right quite far to actually get it on there. Now, one other thing that I really did not appreciate when I got this rifle was the front sight post to adjust your elevation was insanely tight on this thing. I actually broke 2 different AK front sight tools before I finally ended up buying a K&S Precision one, which is incredibly solid, which finally allowed me to turn that front sight post. But that was excessively stiff compared to any AK I've ever experienced. And real quick, we're going to talk about a feature on, or kind of a downside to the PSA AKs. And that's on original AKs or ones built in combat countries, generally or imports. They are going to be dimpled at where the rivets are into the trunnion, so they actually have a little bit of a recess in the trunnion itself to where they can displace the metal into the trunnion. So essentially what that does is it allows the recoil energy from your shot to transfer into the steel section of the receiver instead of into the rivets themselves. Now, from my understanding, PSA does not dimple the stamped steel sheet metal into the trunnion. They just use the rivets themselves to attach that trunnion to the steel receiver. So potential issue over tens of thousands of rounds is shearing off your rivets because all that recoil energy is getting transferred through the softer metal of the rivets. Now, from my understanding, it's not necessarily that big of a deal as long as the rivets are actually fairly well made, which my understanding is the rivets that we use in the US are going to be a little bit higher quality metal than what you're going to see in a lot of other countries. So it might not be as big of an issue as it would be with some other designs, but that is something to keep in mind. And speaking of rivets, one of mine is loose on this gun. So it's going to be my right side support rivet here. So that's one in the middle of the receiver. There's a little bit of play to it and I can lift it up. And if you can reach into the inside of the receiver, you can actually spin it, which is not good. Those things are generally supposed to be pretty solid. For that rivet, it's really just meant to support the receiver and it's not going through the trunnion or something. So it's probably not going to be something catastrophic, but again, it's a fitment issue from the factory. And finally, I have somewhere between 500 and 1,000 rounds through this guy, and the ejector is starting to peen and fold over a little bit. So again, that's going to be a little bit concerning considering my SLR 107, my Arsenal, has probably over 5,000 rounds through it, and I am not seeing that same level of deterioration on it. So again, the metal on this is probably not going to be as high quality for those rails there as it is on those imports. Next up is Ergonomics, where I'm going to give the Krinkov a 2 because it's essentially pretty standard AK here. So just starting at the front, of course, we have that conical flash hider, and it is incredibly easy to remove just by pressing in that detent. And then it'll go ahead and rotate off here, revealing the 24 by 1.5 millimeter threads. So you can just see the end of the barrel there inside of the gas block. Nothing too crazy to see. Go ahead and thread that guy back on. And you can see right up here with the front sight block, I did have to drift that forward or drift it to the right pretty far to get it zeroed. So again, not necessarily an issue. However, it's definitely not ideal as far as AKs go. Now moving back to the charging handle, it is completely typical AK. There's really nothing special about it. As far as your sights go, you have a battle sight here as well as a 400 to 500 meter sight. These are notch style sights and they're not great at all. These are actually pretty hard to pick up generally, so an optic on a Krink is a definite improvement. Now, one thing that I think is a major improvement, or at least an ergonomic one, is this little ledge here on the safety selector. So other than that, it's completely standard AK. But for right-handed shooters, it's very easy to flip it off and on using that ledge here. I think this is probably the biggest ergonomic improvement on this entire rifle, and I actually really, really like that feature. Now, real quick, I can actually show you the RS Regulate mount here. So again, these are great. Just flip that over, and it'll pop straight off. Incredibly easy to use and put back on if you're not a stupid monkey like me. And moving back from there, we do have the folding stock. This button can be incredibly tight for some reason. And eventually, if I get that pressed in there, we can flip this stock around to the side. And actually, this is where I need to take that optic off because you can't have the optic on the side rail and fold the stock at the same time because it needs to fold over this side rail. And up front here, we have this little claw which grabs the stock and locks onto it so it's not going anywhere. But we can go ahead and flip it back out just by flicking it. And there we go. And as far as the magazine goes, 100% typical AK. We have the paddle, and then it's just a rock and lock. So nothing really else to see as far as ergonomics. For maintenance, I'm going to give the Krink a 4, and for the most part, it's standard AK. There are some differences, though. So starting off with disassembling it, the biggest difference is going to be the top cover is, again, attached to the trunnion, so it doesn't actually remove from the rifle. It just hinges open, kind of like the top cover on like a SAW or a 240. So that's actually not necessarily a bad thing. It's one less part to lose if you're out in the field with this thing. And another cool feature from that hinge top cover is there's a little pin up front that basically pulls back into the trunnion when you open up the top cover. And that pin is what is holding on your gas tube and your upper hand guard. So to remove that, incredibly easy to do. And as soon as you open up the top cover and take out the bolt and carrier, you can remove your gas tube. Now, the one place where the Krink, as well as basically all AKs are going to lose points, is replacement parts, because the bolt, if you break one, is not going to be as easy to replace as it is on, say, an AR-15 or other modern options. That's because they are not one size fits all. The bolt is fitted to the trunnion, and you need to make sure that your head spacing is correct when you replace the bolt. So go, no-go gauges, and really, if it has to be replaced, it's recommended that you use a professional gunsmith to make sure that your bolt is correctly fitted to your AK. In terms of modularity, I'm giving the Krinkov a 3. And again, there's plenty of stuff you can change out on this. You can change out the stock, the handguard, the flash hider, the pistol grip, the trigger. safety selector, so there are plenty of options. Where it really loses out though is your ability to change different calibers. You can't swap different uppers. Pulling a barrel and replacing a barrel on an AK is a process that you really need some specialized equipment and training to be able to do correctly. So there are limitations on the modularity of all AK rifles. In terms of price, the Krink's going to get a full 5 because these are very inexpensive to get from PSA. So the cheapest model starts at around $850. From there, they do go up above $1,000 though if you want to get one with a brace or some of the different rail features that they have on there, but they do start off very inexpensive. When it comes to shooting characteristics, I'm going to give the Krink a 4. And starting off with the trigger, again, I actually really like AK triggers, and it weighs in at about 3 pounds, 10 ounces, and it's very smooth. It's pretty light, got a nice take up to it, and a very crisp break. So I really do like the stock trigger on these. Now, as far as the recoil impulse goes, something that we talked about in the Arsenal video is overgassing in AKs is incredibly common and actually beneficial in a lot of cases. The US made AKs, particularly with PSA, are generally going to be perfectly gassed. So they're not going to be overgassed. They're going to be on the lower end of the spectrum for how much gas is going through the system, which is kind of a double-edged sword. So with imported AKs, they're overgassed for reliability purposes. So they're going to be able to chug through a lot worse conditions than a lot of American-made AKs. This rifle is incredibly well gassed, and in perfect conditions, it is a joy to shoot, and it is one of the nicest shooting AKs I've ever actually used. Now, the one thing that comes with that though, with the 8.1 inch barrel, this thing has an insane muzzle blast to it. So particularly when I was using M855 with it, it is just a dragon. With the gassing being a little bit lower on this, it's also easier to suppress. And I did use with my JMac Kingmo muzzle device on this guy, my B&T SRBS 762 can on it, and it was pretty good at actually tamping down on the blast. I still got a bit of a fireball out the end of the can, and it was still loud, obviously, but it did do a pretty good job at tamping down on it. Now, as far as the increased bolt speed on it, it really wasn't bad at all since that is a flow-through can. I was a little bit hesitant to use my full back pressure Saker 762 can on this guy, particularly given what I'm seeing with the build quality and wear on it. I would be a little bit worried about these beating themselves to death with a full back pressure can, but with a flow-through can, it does seem really nice to suppress. In terms of reliability, I'm actually going to give it a 4, because I've only had a single malfunction with this, and that was probably the ammunition's fault. I had a single round where a piece of the brass actually got cut up a little bit so it wouldn't fit into the chamber, but it wasn't necessarily the rifle's fault for that one. It might have been scratched by the rifle itself, but I digress. And other than that, I really haven't had any reliability issues with this. The Krink is definitely going to be on the light side for an AK, and it's going to get a 4 in terms of weight because it weighs about 6.5 pounds, so quite a bit less than most AKs out there. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories for the PSA Krinkov, we come out with a score of 33, which puts it into the B tier. Now, some of the high points for the Krink are going to be its aftermarket support is actually fairly prevalent. There are a lot of parts that you can throw on this thing. It's also a surprisingly good shooter as far as the shooting characteristics go, like recoil due to the lower gassing on it compared to a lot of other AKs. And of course, the price starting under $1,000 is incredibly nice for these. Oh man, now for the downside, starting with accuracy, which is complete dog water on my rifle and probably pushing 10 MOA, so that is an absolute issue on here. The durability is also a little bit questionable on mine. I'm starting to see some wear on the ejector as well as a rivet which is able to spin even though it's just a support rivet. So there are some durability concerns I have with this rifle, as well as it does have classic AK ergonomics which are not that great. And finally, when it comes to the cool tier, I'm going to go ahead and throw the AKS-74U up into the S tier because this thing is an absolute classic. And in my opinion, it is the coolest variant of the AK on the entire face of the planet. In terms of movies, there's frankly too many for me to even begin to talk about them all. So, of course, you have classic 007, you have GoldenEye, really prominent appearance in there. I believe it was even in The World Is Not Enough and also in Die Another Day. And from there, it's just been in an insane amount of movies. So, some of the Fast and Furious movies, Tomb Raider, Black Hawk Down, everyone absolutely loves the AKS 74U, and it pops up all the time. When it comes to video games, it's going to be essentially the same thing. The AKS-74U is everywhere. So your Battlefield series games, pretty much any of them that are going to be in modern times are going to have an AKS-74U. Call of Duty, so starting off with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, that had a really weird kind of hybrid version of the AKS-74U with the underfolder stock, I believe. But also going into Black Ops and some of the more modern games, you'll see the AKS-74U. In Rainbow Six, so Rainbow Six Siege, you have the AKS-74U. I'm not a Tarkov guy, but having friends who play Tarkov, they absolutely talk about the AKS-74U in there as well, which makes a lot of sense. All right, guys, and that's going to do it for my review on the PSA Krinkov. So thank you for checking out that video. Please see my other stuff, like, share, subscribe, and I'll be coming at you with more videos soon.